The historic pace of 2020 has only continued into a tumultuous new year of 2021. For Iowa Republicans, it's a tale of two worlds. A Democratic Party regaining control in Washington, but wins across the board in Iowa for the GOP. We discussed the path forward with Republican Party of Iowa Chairman Jeff Kaufmann on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
Iowa PBS is supported in part by Wells Fargo. Fuel Iowa is a voice and a resource for Iowa's fuel industry. Our members offer a diverse range of products, including fuel, grocery, and convenience items. They help keep Iowans on the move in rural and urban communities. Together, we fuel Iowa.
Small businesses are the backbone of Iowa's communities, and they are backed by Iowa banks. With advice, loans, and financial services, banks across Iowa are committed to showing small businesses the way to a stronger tomorrow. Learn more at iowabankers.com. For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond, celebrating nearly 50 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa PBS. This is the Friday, January 29 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
The election of 2020 and the months since have been a roller coaster journey for Americans. President Donald Trump's impeachment and the Democratic takeover in Washington is contrasted by the solidifying Republican control here in Iowa. To talk about it, we're joined today by Republican Party of Iowa Chairman Jeff Kaufmann. Mr. Chairman, welcome back to the show.
Pleasure to be here, David.
Always good to see you. Journalist also joining us across the table, Erin Murphy, Des Moines Bureau Chief for FUELIowa Enterprises, and Kay Henderson is News Director at Radio Iowa.
Mr. Chairman, the day you were reelected a couple of weeks ago, you said that the Iowa Republican Party is Kim Reynolds' party. What role does Donald Trump have in the future of the Iowa Republican Party?
He's, he has broadened our tent. There's no doubt about that. And he certainly had coattails in the last election. And I think he's a major player in the Republican Party. What his future holds, I do not know. But my reference to Kim Reynolds, I firmly believe, I always have, that whoever the governor is, that party that they share, that makes them the head of the party.
What's your gut tell you about President Trump in the next 3 or 4 years? Is he going to run for election again?
Boy, Erin, if I knew that, I could do interviews all day. The honest answer is I don't know. I was encouraged that he was going to. It sounds like he's going to be helpful in 2022. He and Kevin McCarthy had meetings. I have not talked to the former president since the election. I don't know. I can say one thing as chairman of the party, one of the two parties in a First Nation state, everyone's welcome. And I hope we're going to have a very vigorous process. I'm going to be neutral.
Does that include Ben Sass of Nebraska?
It does.
You were pretty critical of him early on.
I am, and I was, and I still can be. But no, everyone is welcome here, David. Look, when you're chair of the party, and that goes with not just a presidential candidate, there are a lot of candidates. Look, I don't love every single member of the Republican Party, but as chair of this party, if I want us to remain first in the nation, I'm going to have to welcome everyone.
I want to go back to Erin's question. If Donald Trump runs, does he clear the field? Is it just, why bother? He's going to win. Do these other candidates, Mike Pompeo and all these people that have been here or are coming, is it just over?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, we're definitely going to have a vigorous caucus. I don't think it's going to be like our previous one if he chooses to run. But I'm going to put the welcome mat out for every single candidate that wants to come into this state.
Erin?
Is the Republican Party facing another civil war right now, or is there unity within the party? We see you mentioned President Trump speaking with Leader McCarthy here in an effort to move that, but you also have Representative Gates going to campaign against Republicans. more broadly and within Iowa, is there fraction within the party?
I really don't see it in Iowa. I firmly believe that Democrats have always been better at keeping their arguments quiet. They're just better at that. Our arguments are usually very public, very loud, and we fully expect that. If your president, even though he did well in Iowa, if the president of your party does not win, you're definitely going to have a very vigorous conversation after that. I truly believe that what we're going to be seeing coming from Washington, D.C., I hope I'm wrong, but from the Biden campaign and now the Biden presidency, I think there's going to be a lot for us to unify around.
You said there are Republicans that you love and those that you don't. Do you love Donald Trump, and do you agree with his analysis of the election being rigged?
I certainly, and obviously I don't mean love literally, but do I respect Donald Trump and what he did for our party? Yes, I do. He had coattails in Iowa. I know there were some states he didn't. I know there were some states that maybe there was a backlash. But in Iowa, it's irrefutable. And so, you know, in terms of his role here in Iowa, he helped us. We would have still, let me give you an example, Kay. I firmly believe that Pat Grassley would have still held the House majority. I do believe that Donald Trump added a few to that majority in terms of his coattails. So I think that was, I think in that sense, I am grateful for that. I want to hold the Trump voters, most of whom, the vast majority of whom, believe in the same things that Republicans believe in and are very peace-loving individuals.
They also believe the election was stolen. Do you agree?
I believe that we have a lot of work to do in a lot of states in order to make the elections, the election integrity, believable. In politics, it's all about perception. And wherever the truth lies, we all know that we have problems in various states. We all know that Iowa did a pretty darn good job, some of which extended from what the legislature did at the end of the session last time. But we also have a perception issue. We have tens of millions of people that believe that Donald Trump that the election was stolen from him. I think the easiest salve for that is for the various states to actually tighten up the election integrity.
But we only have that perception because President Trump is making these claims without evidence. I mean, is that a reason to overhaul states' elections laws just because one candidate made unfounded claims of voter fraud?
Well, I think Donald Trump, the Donald Trump's claims that were controversial is whether the election fraud and the election irregularities actually cost him the presidency. I don't think there's anybody that seriously doubts that in states like Georgia and Pennsylvania, there were problems. I mean, in Iowa, we had a good election. I'm here to tell you that I am satisfied with what we've done. But I'm also here to tell you that I hope that Jack Whitmer and Pat Grassley take some leadership role in making it even better.
I want to put a finer point on this question.
Okay.
Is Donald Trump, is Joseph Biden the legitimately elected president of the United States?
Oh, as soon as the Electoral College was certified, yes.
And Donald Trump is the loser.
Donald Trump did not win the Electoral College vote. That makes him, in American politics, that makes him the loser of the 2020 election.
Don't Republican Party leaders like yourself have a burden here to explain that to people? Because other conversations are undermining the legitimacy of our democracy.
But David, in terms of that explanation, I mean, to me, it's so obvious that, you know, I mean, Joe Biden took the oath of office. There's no turning back from that. But here's what I worry about. If we say that Joe Biden won, if I say that there was absolutely no election problems, there was no fixes that are needed, then all of a sudden we just continue to do the same thing and we don't work on voter identification. Other states don't work on ballot harvesting. And those are all issues that we were working on long before Donald Trump was talking about losing an election.
On the day that you were reelected, you said that your goals were to get Kim Reynolds reelected in 2022 and to get Chuck Grassley reelected. Is he running?
Well, if he chooses to run, nice try, Kay. No, but I truly don't know. And I think Senator Grassley had talked to a reporter and said that he will make that decision. I will tell you this, that if he does run, I'm going to be smiling. But I don't know. But if Chuck Grassley does not run, then obviously my goal slides to a fair and neutral primary to see who is our candidate and then getting that candidate to victory.
Do you have any idea how big that primary might be and who would be in it?
It wasn't five. I think it was 5 people that Senator Ernst emerged from. I would assume that it will be that it will include several people, and we have a large bench. You folks have asked me about that before, and we're very pleased. I mean, we got a capital full of candidates, and we have a lot of successful business people. So I think it'll be vigorous, but I want to make sure I'm crystal clear here today, and that is Senator Grassley. If he makes that decision, the Republican Party is behind him. Look, the guy can outthink me, outwork me, and outrun me. Literally, I'm sure that he could be a United States Senator for 6 years. And I mean that sincerely.
How about the other half of that team that Kay was talking about? Governor Reynolds, every indication that she's going to run for re-election, handicap her, not knowing who her opponent might be, but how do you feel about her prospects?
Once again, the success of Donald Trump, aside from the controversies that you've asked me about, the bottom line strength of Donald Trump in this state has been following through on campaign promises. I have always believed that was the strength of that. I think he was able to acquire votes from people that didn't even necessarily agree with some of the policy issues, but it was such a relief and such a welcome, a welcoming kind of message that he was following through. I think Kim Reynolds is doing the same thing. I mean, today we're going to see that she is going to follow through on a promise that kids were going to have in-school learning. She's doing that right now. She's following through, and she is rural and small-town Iowa, and we all know that's an area that is problematic for Democrats. I like her chances.
She's also the face of the state's response to the pandemic, and people have their varying opinions on that as a campaign issue. How do you think that plays in her re-election?
Well, even though 2020 was all about Trump in many ways, when it comes to the legislature, there was also overtones of Kim Reynolds' leadership. And I believe the outcome in the legislature is indicative of the outcome of the legislative races is indicative of how she is going to do as well. I think many people, there's plenty in a pandemic, there are no right answers oftentimes. And there's a fine line you walk. I truly believe that people do not doubt the sincerity of her, and I truly believe that she walked that line between keeping the economy open and the safety and health of our citizens.
To Erin's question, you got to agree. Her handling of the pandemic is probably going to determine the outcome of the election?
I think it'll be a major factor, but these issues right now she's dealing with about bringing kids back to school, I think Iowans are very, very relieved at what she's doing today.
Okay.
Paul Pate, the Secretary of State, has, I guess, emerged as a potential for a primary challenge. I see people who were involved in the challenge of Steve King talking about challenging his re-election. Is that going to happen? Is that helpful to the party?
So, Kay, you're wondering if Paul Pate's going to have a primary?
Correct.
I have heard, no one has talked to me about running in a primary against Paul Pate. Here's the thing, as the chair of the party, I definitely have 2 phases of a campaign. First phase is the primary, where I wait. I wait to see what the people give me. The second is whoever would emerge, if Paul Pate wins a primary, whether it's contested or not, I'm going to be on the Paul Pate team.
There will be on the ballot not just elections for offices, but also a proposed constitutional amendment that would put language similar to the federal Second Amendment for gun rights into the Iowa Constitution. Having that on the ballot, the political question here is that, does that help Republican candidates in your estimation?
I think it does, Erin. And, let me put on just my mask of an observer. Let me take off the Republican mask for just a second and say, I love the way that with our process for amending our Constitution. I mean, I got a little populist strain in me, and I think it's wonderful anytime we have the people weighing in on things. Do I hope in this particular instance? Do I hope and do I think it will help Republicans? Yes, I do. We will be 45 states out of 50 that have this in our Constitution. 44 states already have some form of this amendment.
And real quick before we move on from 2022, you had talked about Donald Trump brought in some new voters to the Republican Party. Can you keep them in a midterm when he's not on the ballot, he's no longer president? people don't know whether he'll run again. Can you maintain those?
Excellent question. The honest answer is we're going to try. We are going to, I mean, that is imperative. In fact, in some ways, that's aside from the fact of whether Donald Trump decides to run again, because what we have to appeal to is the issues and what he stood for. I think the Republican Party reflects what those individuals like, and we just have to educate them, and we're going to try. We're going to try.
Isn't the party, though, have the two parties sort of changed positions with blue-collar Iowans? Used to be the Democratic Party was the blue-collar party. Republicans were a more urban, well-educated party. Hasn't that changed?
David, I think when we look back on this period of time, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to note, but I think one of the things we're going to note is possibly that very rather transformational change in the two parties, and I think we saw it very clearly here in Iowa. So I would agree with the premise of your question and your conclusion.
So in 2018, that's probably why you lost. Some of those voters stayed home. But in 2020, they were coming back out and you had some political success. If that's the case, is in 2022, there could be a constitutional amendment on abortion. I'm sorry, 2024, there could be a constitutional amendment on abortion. Is that the same thing, gin up the base?
No, I don't think the timing, I mean, you know how much they tried to get that bill through last session. So I don't think I don't think the timing is planned like that. But let me connect the two questions that both you gentlemen just asked me. I think the fact in 2022 that we do have a Second Amendment on the actual ballot, I think that helps us bring some of those voters, some of those blue-collar voters you're talking about, I think that helps us to bring them out. So I think the two complement each other in that way.
Talk about this last election tactics. What did you do what did the Republicans do that the Democrats did not do? Is there anything? What was the key to victory?
Oh, I mean, it's very stark. I mean, this is a textbook case of why Iowa should remain first in the nation, and it's a textbook case of in a small state you can make it personal, and that is the Republicans campaigned. The Democrats came on too late, and honestly, there was a very safe way by anybody's definition of safe. There was a safe way to campaign, and our candidates were wearing masks. Our candidates were sometimes a lot more than 6 feet apart. Very, very few. I literally can count on both hands the amount of complaints I received for doing that. The other thing, David, to complement that, and I tell you, this is a lesson that woe to any chair that does not take this lesson to heart, and that is also we've shown that you cannot buy Iowans. I mean, in legislative race after legislative race, we were grossly outspent. But we had our candidate out on the ground, and we had the other candidates. Fred Hubbell was dumping in money, and former New York mayor was dumping in money, and it just did not case. In some cases, we were outspent 5-1. Joni Ernst is another situation. So the two lessons are face-to-face campaigning. It still works. I think that's a good thing for our democracy. And number two, I don't think Iowans can be bought.
After the 2020 election, there was a recount in Iowa's 2nd congressional district. Regardless of the outcome, I wanted to ask you do you think that election law should be changed? God forbid there's a statewide recount. How would it happen under the current rules?
Well, I'll be honest, Kay, I don't know enough of the details of how that has proceeded. I know it was certified, the election. Marinette Miller makes one. And I know it was certified with both Republican and Democratic support. And I know that Rita Hart did not go to every single step she could, including the last step of the Supreme Court. I do not have any inside information on this, but I would very much assume that the legislature is going to take a very long look at that whole procedure. It's one of those things that so rarely happens. There could be some things to tweak that, and they've never looked at it because there's so many other things on top.
But is it so rare? I mean, a few years ago we had House District 55. A handful of votes could have made a difference there. This state is, despite our conversation about how well the Republicans did, the voter registrations in this state are pretty close. You guys have, the last time I looked, about 16,000 more than the Democrats. It's very close. So logic tells me that you're going to have more of these situations that Kay is talking about. I'm curious how do we cure that we cured the problem in House District 55. How do we cure the problem that's happening in that congressional district?
Well, I mean, and the cure is certainly when you have a Republicans and Democrats both certifying that election, to take it to Nancy Pelosi and put it in a purely partisan framework. We all know there is, I mean, Cindy Axne, who is trying to straddle the fence on this, cannot absolutely look us in the eye and say that this isn't going to be pure power politics. They are going to find, if Nancy Pelosi takes this, that Raskin committee is going to find some votes someplace, somewhere. That is not the way you fix these problems. This is the wrong way to go, and the next time it could be a Democrat that is being threatened.
The question, though, is the voters in that congressional district, different voters had their votes counted differently. And there's an equal protection issue there that ought to be fixable.
I don't disagree. And the other thing I would say, David, is that we need to make sure of the consistency. And I also believe that how can we fully make an assessment on that case if Rita Hart is not accepting those results, if she didn't go every single step? We have a Supreme Court, and there's a step there, and she has just negated that. It makes it a little harder to assess a process.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we talk about the Iowa caucuses
Sure.
While we have you here. This is more happening on the other side of the aisle from you, but Democrats have a new state party chairman in Russ Wilborn. They're coming off a caucus cycle where they had significant issues and kind of ignited that conversation about whether Iowa should be first. What does your hunch, what does your gut tell you? What are you expecting is going to happen on the Democratic side?
You know, I don't know, and I am going to, and you've been following me, all three of you have been following me enough to know how serious I take this and how bipartisan I am in this entire process. We must keep first in the nation, we must keep our caucus, and we must keep the carve-out process. There are three goals here. So Iowa's a little different than like New Hampshire. They want to keep first primary and they want to keep carve-out, but they don't have to worry about the caucus. So we have three battles to fight. In answer specifically to your question, I will still double, triple, and quadruple down that the Democratic Party was fed a whole lot of ridiculous demands at the very end of that process. And so I actually stand by my colleagues. I may disagree with them on a lot of things, but I stand by them in this. I believe that Ross Wilborn, he's already reached out to me. We are going to have the same trusting relationship on this issue that I did with Andy McGuire and Scott Brennan and Troy Price. And I fully believe that he's going to be able to make that case. Where I stand in terms of him making his case is, Ross, you tell me when I can be helpful, because I can also be not helpful even when I'm trying in that situation. From my perspective, Erin, if the Democrats can't hold it, my job gets much more difficult too, because then you're looking at, if you can the Republicans have a caucus without the Democrats? So we survive or we sink together, and we're going to stand together, and I look forward to my first meeting with Ross.
Do you have to wait to set your calendar to see what happens on the Democratic side?
I don't think so. We will, in terms of the dynamics here at the RNC, we're not going to have a voting meeting until summer. We had a very good meeting, had a really great meeting with Ronna Romney. I've had a great meeting with our new RNC co-chair, Tommy Hicks, and we had a good meeting with all of the carve-out states. I like where we're at right now. I won't lie, I would have been much easier if Donald Trump was president, because we wouldn't have had a fight. That's not in the cards. So I can cry over spilled milk, or I can do what I need to do, and I'm going to do what I need to do.
Would you oppose having all four carve-out states have their contests on the same day, which is something Democrats have begun to discuss?
I think, Kay, it defeats the purpose. The purpose of starting with Iowa is so that a Rick Santorum or a Barack Obama can actually go out there and actually campaign face-to-face. If we load up four, then we're back to starting the equivalent of starting in a state like, maybe not California, but in a state that is much larger. Also, New Hampshire would have a huge problem with that, because obviously they have in their constitution they got to go first.
One of the reasons we're talking about this is because the Democratic Party's app, the application on a smartphone, failed. You folks used an app in 2016. Are you already just laying awake at night worrying about the app you're developing for 2024? Well,
and I just want to qualify that the difference there is that we were able to use the app that we wanted to use. Troy Price had a huge problem in that he was already on his way to a successful caucus. I firmly believe that. And Troy was handed something at the last minute from the DNC. I think that's part of the issues, but do I worry about it? You bet. I mean, the eyes of the world are on us.
More immediately, we'll be talking about the caucuses on this show a lot in the next 40. Census data is coming back late. I believe the latest number is that the states get census data at the end of April. What's this do to our redistricting process? Have you talked to your leaders in the legislature? How do the parties draw lines, recruit candidates with this ambiguity?
Sure. There is a lot of ambiguity, and I know that there's being pressure placed upon legislative services because we have a nonpartisan process here in Iowa, a good process, I believe, in Iowa. And so, you know, the two leaders, I would assume, will have to come back and deal with this because we cannot let something like that go until the next session. But yeah, it's tough. This is one of those cases where COVID is getting in the way of what needs to be done in view of both parties.
Special session?
I haven't, you know, I don't have the ability to call one, but I would assume that Jack Whitford and Pat Grassley are discussing that.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, we're out of time. Thank you very much for being with us.
Always a pleasure to be here with all three of you.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of Iowa Press with our guest from the other side of the political aisle, the new chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, Ross Wilburn. He'll join us to discuss how Democrats in Iowa can regroup in the years ahead. That's IDP Chair and State Representative Ross Wilburn on Iowa Press at our regular times, 7:30 Friday night and again at noon on Sunday. For all of us here at Iowa PBS, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
Iowa PBS is supported in part by Wells Fargo. Fuel Iowa is a voice and a resource for Iowa's fuel industry. Our members offer a diverse range of products, including fuel, grocery, and convenience items. They help keep Iowans on the move in rural and urban communities. Together, we fuel Iowa.
Small businesses are the backbone of Iowa's communities, and they are backed by Iowa banks. With advice, loans, and financial services, banks across Iowa are committed to showing small businesses the way to a stronger tomorrow. Learn more at iowabankers.com.